Ringo, Ringoir, et moi. And all the coperinis that the chief executive of the city of Seattle could scare up. Ooh, hope that beer's for us. Here for the 5th floor Maloney room.
Okay. Do you know where the elevator is?
Our film series. But yes, this should be a high point in the history of 20th century art, shouldn't it? Kurt was M meets the FBI. KCWM. VS. The FBI. Birdie of the BDA. Birdie of the FBI. Are you a police officer?
No, I'm not.
What's your name?
Why is that important to you?
You seem to be the guy limiting press access, so it's important to me. You're not going to tell me your name, huh?
I'm not a police officer. That I'll answer.
Are you in any way employed by the SPD? I mean, have I seen you at police functions before?
Walt. Sorry, they don't want any cameras.
Walt Hubbard, is that the guy's name? So I guess we'll do this here in the shadow of the hammering home. Yeah, it was quite a little event there in the Maloney room on the 5th floor. A lot of baloney in the Maloney. So for those of you who've not quite gotten the idea, here we are at the central point of the entirety of the affair, which is that we're testifying today. We have just testified at the mayor's special panel on police corruption. Of course, that's not what they're calling it. They're calling it the they won't admit what the actual full title of the panel is, although on one occasion I think it was on their answering machine, it was referred to as the mayor's panel on the mayor's citizens panel on review of police policies and procedures. In other words, they're advertising it as this citizens panel, citizens review panel, which actually, is a description, which could have been lifted directly from my statement in the election guide, which is a citizens review board is necessary for the Seattle Police Department. And well, you saw Mr. Hubbard there, who's a police something or other. I guess he's a civilian employee, but the surliness of Mr. Hubbard is what you can use to read the entirety of the occasion, if you really need to see it in frank terms. That is, this was supposed to be out of the purview of the police department. And what is one of Stamper's executive assistants doing here? This guy, from what I've seen, where Stamper goes, he follows. So he's Stamper's guy. And yet they're holding it here at the Art Museum to give people the impression that, they can come in and talk in confidence and they're not going to be spied upon by the PD. When in fact, the guy's a Norm Stormer. He's probably on the cell phone now, giving him an update. Yeah, there he goes. So you don't want to tell me who you are, huh? One of Norm's stormers, eh?
Anonymous is good. And who are you taking pictures for?
Not you, man. Do you know who that guy is? Ooh, he just stepped into a building, didn't he?
Yeah.
He's gonna go make one of those Maxwell Smart shoe phone calls. There's a guy with a camera.
Was,
Walt.
Bernard?
Nah, Walt. Walt Hubbard. And he denied being a Seattle police officer. But he's some kind of, I guess he's a civilian employee, so he's kind of Clintonizing the terms there. So were you up there on the 5th floor?
5th floor. There's a 5th floor?
Oh, you're a tourist. Leave me alone. So, the guy wouldn't admit who he was and, wanted to act surly in the extreme. And let's hope he's not sending out the jackbooted type of Norm Stormer. Oh no, he had his car. Ooh, he's got some kind of vanity plate like Alpha 1 or something. That's pretty spooky. Some guy who won't admit that he's a cop, who hangs out with the chief of police all the time. He's got his private parking at the SAM here, and he rolls out in his red sports car, or red luxury sedan, and he's got some vanity plate. I think it said Alpha something. Anyway. So we're wanting to let you know what went on, and of course you saw the video up to the point of entering the meeting. And the business of King 5 showing up at the last minute is pretty humorous. I mean, I'm not alleging that King 5 is engaging in some sort of crafty little thing with the coppers, but it was awfully convenient for the coppers in the review panel that King showed up and goes through that thing with Hubbard about, why their cameras are unwelcome, and the guy said, Vivian Phillips, the mayor's communications director, invited us, and Hubbard said, there's no cameras allowed, you can't take any video. And of course this happened right precisely at the moment when I attempted to enter the facility because I was called to give my little testimony. So, in any case, they had their little scheme for why I should not be allowed to bring in my camcorder, which is, of course, minuscule in the extreme, and would pose no harm or threat through, catching on fire or exploding suddenly or whatever other theoretical argument there might be for being afraid of a TV camera. But they have described this as a public meeting. And as far as I know, public meetings are open to cameras, but believe me, they were having none of it. McKay, who just exited, said that, he stuck out his big hand, and I said, before we shake hands and make friends, let's find out what these ground rules are, because I've got this camera here, and I'd like to make a recording of my testimony. I'm a journalist and a witness to police misconduct, and why shouldn't I be allowed to make a recording of what I have to say? And first guy to dig in was Mr. Locke, who is a member of the faculty at the UW and a paid police consultant. And he said, well, you've got to be one thing or the other. Are you here as a journalist or are you here as a witness? And this is a very kindly looking gentleman who they seat, closest to you, within about 3 feet, and who tends to do most of the digging in with, this and that. And that is verbally digging in with this and that. And so I said, well, your name is Mr. Locke, is that correct? And he said, yes. And I said, well, you're a member of the faculty of the UW, yes? And you're also a paid consultant for the Seattle Police Department, is that correct? And he was, I'm not here to be interrogated by you. And I said, nobody's interrogating. I'm just asking, is that who you are? I mean, you're in fact two things at once. You're a paid consultant for the PD, and you're on the faculty staff of the UW. Is that correct? And then they all started digging in with their little bits about, we're not on trial. You came here to give us your information. I don't know why you're asking us questions, etc. And, McKay at one time said, we're not on trial here, and there were some comments apparently that led people to believe they knew who, led each other to know they knew who I was. And then Ms. Durkin dug in with, I don't know who you are. Perhaps you could explain what you do, who you are. And I said, I could ask the same of you. I'm kind of curious. I was unable to find any specific reference to your being related to Martin Durkin. And are you in fact related to Martin Durkin? And she said, yes, I am. And I said, so that would be Martin J. Durkin Jr. and Sr., is that correct? And she said, yes. And I said, so in other words, he's the guy who handled the famous $5,000 for Gary Locke. That, of course, Locke, took from someone who's has the title of a Buddhist priest in a very Al Gore-like situation over on the east side when Locke was running for governor. And she said, no, that's not correct. And I said, come on, what do you mean that's not correct? It's in the paper. I got the clip right here. And she said, no, that's not correct. And I said, well, Ms. Durkin, it is correct. Now, he didn't take the money. Locke took the money. He's the guy who stuck it in his pocket. Your brother is the guy who ran the money back. Is that, do I have it pretty much correct here? And she, given the weight of details offered, didn't deny that this was in fact the case. And said something like, well, what does that have to do with anything? I said, well, what it has to do with is, you're investigating because of an incident wherein an individual, a police officer, pocketed $10,000 of illegal money that was taken from the home of a deceased person. Gary Locke also pocketed half that amount, that is $5,000. And, in a very similar kind of situation, just stuck it in his pocket and hoped that there would be no flap about it. And so you're investigating the theft of the famous $10,000 when, in fact, your very own brother, the lobbyist, is known for having trafficked backwards to the source, of course, Gary Locke's famous $5,000 in, what is a situation that most of us don't encounter that much in life, which is handling, forbidden packets of $100 bills. So, how much confidence can we have that you're going to be an objective investigator or analyst of Mr. Davis and his famous alleged theft? And of course they didn't like the sound of this, and Mr. Professor Locke dug in with, I'll have you know, I very much resent the tenor of your questions and the fact that you think you can come in here and ask us this sort of thing. You're here to give us information. And, Mr. Locke, being rather aged, is apparently the guy that they've chosen to, make the, sort of blandest and bluntest of assertions about authority, which, of course, is the sort of thing that lawyers are more or less prohibited by style, if not by statute, from doing. And the one bit I've left out here is that as I got started, and pretty much what I'm describing was just in the first few minutes, they started laying into me with the time constraints business, started laying into me with, you have 3 to 5 minutes, I don't know whether you're aware of that, to let us know what you want us to know. And I said, well, that's really pretty funny. That was former Judge Johnson that laid that across. He was seated at the far end of the conference table, and I said, well, Judge, I've been watching people coming in and out of here since 6 o'clock. Everybody else is getting 15 minutes. And, they kind of looked around at each other, and they were all terribly surprised that anyone would care to notice what was actually going on, which is basically every single person that went in out of, the mere dozen or so who showed up was being given the full complement of a quarter hour. And believe me, they weren't posing this 3 to 5 minutes thing as a rhetorical proposition. They were telling me you'd better take care of it in 3 to 5 minutes. But after I threw it back at them, they finally relented and said, well, if we find that you're conveying information to us, this is basically Judge Johnson, that's worthy of 15 minutes of our time, we'll be happy to hear you for that length of time. And of course, all I could say was that remains to be seen. Certainly I have a lot that I'd like to let you know about. And, then they kind of laid into me with, this is a panel, as you know, that has some very specific intentions of finding out what's going on with our Seattle Police Department and making improvements. And would you please confine your statements to this subject? And, I did more or less. I did ask Mr. McKay, the former U.S. Attorney, who was seated to my right, if in fact he was now a criminal defense attorney rather than being on the prosecutorial side as the U.S. Attorney, which he was from 1989 through 1993. And he responded, well, I just don't see what that really has to do with anything. And I said, well, what it has to do with is if you're defending white-collar criminals in your law practice, which is what I saw, in the paper, in a very general description, I couldn't find anything more specific, that has bearing. You're a criminal defense attorney. People hear that you're you're a former U.S. attorney, and they figure your state of mind is more that of a prosecutor rather than a defense attorney. And if you're used to defending people that are doing, essentially, the sort of criminal act that Mr. Davis is accused of, which is pocketing money illegally and then saying either it didn't happen or whatever, then that might skew your perception of this panel. But again, they were having none of this, and they insisted that I start making comments that would be particularly relevant to what we were discussing. Then Bertie, she's known, Bertie Passanelli, of the FBI, SAC of the FBI, dug in with, may I just interrupt? I want to know, do you have a recorder going on now? Are you tape recording this? And I said, well, I came in and I showed you that I turned my camera off, right? You know that. She said, no, I want to know, are you recording this? And I said, am I being interrogated? Am I a suspect in some crime? What are you so worried about? And she said, I want to know now. Answer the question. Are you recording this? And I said, well, let me ask you, Bertie. I didn't call her Bertie, but let me ask you, are you recording this? Am I recording this, she asks. Why would I be recording this? And I said, well, you're the FBI. The FBI is known for that sort of thing. It's virtually what they do best, right? And she wouldn't answer either. And we sat there, and she said, no, you tell me. And I said, no, you tell me. And so that went on really for, a good 30 seconds or so. And I offered that maybe, okay, I'll tell you what, Ms. Passanelli, we'll both write it down on a slip of paper, and then we'll turn it over at the same time. And she didn't think that was too funny. And then I say, okay, I'll tell you, and then you tell me. All right, is that fair? So I said, no, I'm not recording it. Are you satisfied? And then she said, no, we're not recording it either. Although, obviously, I was being evasive merely because I'm a playful sort of guy. Why she was being evasive on this question is not really completely obvious, is it? It's a conference room, Nobody ever goes into a conference room anywhere and assumes that it's not being recorded, in business functions or anything else. So when you're in there with the FBI and the mayor's panel, my best guess was it was being recorded. And so I attempted to open a discussion of actual relevant facts and got out the notebook and said, well, you're saying that you want me to comment on information that's relevant to your panel, but I and many people are not particularly convinced that we know what your panel is really all about. This has been a huge question. It was a question that was asked a dozen different ways in your press conference, which was, only 6 days ago. Said I wasn't invited, but we both know that you did get a lot of questioning over what the scope and purpose of this all was, and I don't think you really answered that to anyone's satisfaction. But let me just pose this to you. The most interesting point in the whole panel discussion in the press conference was the concluding moments when Ms. Durkin said that she was asked by a reporter, so you're accepting the premise that it did not go up the chain. In fact, I'll read the whole thing. Durkin says, I agree with Birdie in terms of what our scope is. However, if we get information that shows that there's something in the way IIS works that prohibits information from getting up a chain where it should be, obviously we're going to look at that. And then a reporter said, so you're accepting the premise that that is the information about Davis and Cameron, did not go up the chain? Durkin said, no, I'm not accepting that premise. And then there was a slight pause. Slight only, believe me. And then Charles V. Johnson, former judge, rang in with, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In other words, there were a lot of reasons why they didn't want any follow-ups to that question. They gave the reporters a mere second and a half or so to jump in with another, and they failed to do so, so it was over. But that was the most interesting moment of all, because that was the moment at which, either by accident or by design, it was revealed that they have certain suspicions about whether Norm Stamper knew more about this than he has revealed. Norm Stamper, the chief of police. And so I said, well, that is the crux of the whole thing. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel, what are you going to do about that question? You made numerous statements about how you don't have subpoena power, how you're not investigating individual instances or you're not investigating old cases, you're not investigating new cases. Well, you're not investigating old cases or current cases is what they said. And specifically, they made the assertion that they're not re-investigating the Cameron Davis business. And so I said, well, if you don't do something to investigate that, or at least to find out what the facts are, independent of any other source, then you're not doing anything at all. You might as well just quit, because that's what everyone in the public expects you to ascertain. That precise thing. It's what I expect you to get at least in part with this panel, and it's what really everyone expects. This was convened because of that case. So the one question that you're going to have to ask is, what did Norm Stamper know, and when did he know it? Because so far all they've done is hang the whole thing on one sergeant in the IIS department. And you all should know, although no one referred to it in your press conference certainly, that if you go and look at the Seattle City Code, one of the lengthiest sections on the police department is the power of the chief of police and the intimate relationship between the chief of police and the IIS division. It really essentially is a part of his office. It is not really under anyone else's command. There may be a physical remove between the Dexter Horton building and the public safety building of a few blocks, but it's his office. It's his special unit. It has to be that way, and it's very specifically dictated by city ordinance that I'm sure goes back many decades that this is in fact the case. So why is it, I said, why is it that no one dropped a dime in the Cameron Davis affair? None of the 8 officers who've been enumerated in the press, plus God knows how many others that undoubtedly heard something, why is it that they literally did not drop a dime? Or, as I said, it would literally be 35 cents these days in a payphone, but all they had to do was dial up IIS and say, I am so-and-so, I'm in the homicide squad, I know Don Cameron, I know Cloyd Steiger and Earl Davis, and this is what happened. Sorry, I only have a minute to spare. I gotta go. Bye. And if that happened, according to the propaganda, current and past of the Seattle Police Department, that anonymous tip should have been taken seriously to the extent that there would have been an IIS file generated. So why did that never happen? Obviously, Steiger told Guibo in IIS for the purposes of protecting his career. Now, obviously, he was on site, according to the allegations, and intimately involved in it that way, but if there's a perception that, wrongdoing is supposed to be something that's reported by police officers, especially men of rank in the other central unit, the homicide unit, then why did none of them make any move to literally drop a dime or 35 cents on this case and inform IIS? And I said, there are 2 visions of this that you can take. Either one, it happened because Norm Stamper has created a vacuum in leadership in the Seattle Police Department, and the police department, it's very high-ranking members because they're in homicide and IIS, even if they're designated rank is not that high. They know that nothing will be done about this. They know that Stamper's not going to go after Cameron, and he's not going to go after anyone whom Cameron is trafficking in misdeeds with. They know this. And so hypothetically, what happened was that to answer the primary question that you seem to be putting forward, why is it that the culture of the Seattle Police Department doesn't involve persons even taking rudimentary steps to protect themselves by informing IIS? It's because there's a complete paucity of leadership by Norm Stamper. They know that he will do nothing about it. And Clark Kimmerer, who was the IIS head at that time, would do nothing about it either. They knew this, in theory. And the other possibility, which has to be considered, is equally damning, although it would be a lot harder to decipher, and you may not be able to get at this factually, which is that people did inform on them. The fact of Cloyd Steiger telling Guibo is informing. And Steiger has made no statement whatsoever that he said, by the way, I'm just telling you this as a good bud, don't pass it along as you're required to do to others within IIS. He's never made a statement along those lines because it would be misconduct in itself. And as we've described before, Guibo's statements on this are difficult to decipher. He, according to Stamper and everyone else, says that he doesn't remember, but he has a pretty good idea that he didn't pass the information about the theft along to his superiors, Wingstrand and Reed, that he merely told them about a drinking problem. But it's probably a lot more complicated than that, and I don't believe myself that anyone that it was possible to hush this sort of thing up completely, which is the assertion that's being made so that this thing can be covered up in plain view with the panel and everything else. So I said one way or another, either you've got a lack of leadership by Norm Stamper, or you've got a lot of intrigue where people are twisting each other's arms to hush this thing up. In either case, it all comes down to why is it that Norm Stamper is still employed at this police department? And the question came from someone, I think it was Judge Johnson, well, why should Norm Stamper still be employed at this police department? And I said, well, because of what I'm describing, and also because of the fact of this interview he gave last year to Susan Painter. Now, I discussed this with Painter only a couple of weeks ago, and she says it's absolutely valid. She says that Stamper called her, thanked her, and said, by all means, let people know that you didn't take anything out of context, and that I support the column that you wrote. And also Painter herself, shortly after the initial column, published words to that effect. So it cannot be doubted that Stamper stands by what Susan Painter reported, which was, and I read him the famous quote, I read them the famous quote, which the most scandalous part of an extremely scandalous interview, which is that Norm Stamper says that he choked out 100 persons on an indiscriminate basis. He strangled them, and this is obviously felonious assault that's been perpetrated on a serial basis. And in fact, the way that the conversation in the little hearing here developed, I said, you know about Norm Stamper and him strangling 100 people, right? And there was this sort of general hubbub around the table there where they all said, well, no, what are you talking about? Said, as a police officer, I'm shocked that Norm Stamper could have even ever been appointed police chief with everyone knowing that he was virtually a Klansman with a gun and a badge. And they said, what are you talking about? Is something that happened here? And so everyone's feigning this naivete, or otherwise they're pretty drastically poorly informed about the interview of a year ago, of, literally 13 months ago. And so I read them the quotation, and I said, this alone should disqualify him from being chief of police. In fact, if he was an applicant to be a patrolman, as I've described in our monologue previously, he would have been turned down, so why is he the head of the chief of police? So it was clearly established, obviously in the hearing, that as I said directly to them, if you're going to accomplish anything with your panel here, you've got to answer the fundamental question, does Norm Stamper stay or go? And, and if he's going to stay, then let's not kid around about who knows about this interview and these incredible statements he made. If he's going to stand by those statements and you're going to stand by him, then you're standing by those statements also. And of course, I think any reasonable person would say that they're completely inexcusable and precisely the sort of thing that people get fired from executive positions in municipal corporations for. All the time, people get fired for saying one dumb thing to a reporter that offends someone's sensibilities, ethnic minority or otherwise. And again, we're not going to encompass all of his comments to Ms. Painter of a year ago in this monologue, but he was talking about you go in there and you get the expletive deleted. In other words, you go in there and you get the biggest nigger in that bar and you drag him out, Norm, and Norm says he dutifully did that. Well, first of all, skinny little Norm Stamper, if you ask me, he never choked out anybody on his own, and he certainly never went in and got the biggest baddest criminal in some tavern and dragged him out by his own. It's pure fantasy. I mean, as we've described, all of this certainly goes to an examination of his psychological state, because for the first time, let me say categorically, I don't think that most of the stuff some of the stuff in that interview is real. It's in a way, a tactic. I think primarily it's a tactic for him to survive in his job, despite other controversies, to literally live through this. It's literally that strategy, that he'll create a huge furor, and then the papers and everyone else is going to help him live through this, and then he'll be Norm Stamper, the survivor, with these wild, crazy tactics to, as he explains it, help the police department understand the troubled past of American law enforcement by saying, to the public and everyone else that his officers are going to do as he says. They're not going to do as he does or did, which is a highly suspect public approach for him to be taking. Mr. Stamper, the PhD in leadership and public policy, or leadership and human behavior, I think his PhD is supposed to be in. Yeah. I think he went a little bit too far into the theoretical realm on that one. But in any case, the comments alone should be enough to disqualify him in any reasonable locality. And then it came to essentially concluding statements, which Mr. Locke interrupted me about 8 or 9 minutes into this thing and said, your 15 minutes are up. 8 or 9 minutes by my estimation. And I said, really, was that you're one member of this panel who's interrupting me and saying that you want no further comment? You're speaking for everyone here? And, I mean, I didn't believe that there had been 15 minutes that had transpired. And Mr. Johnson, referred to as Judge Johnson, as so many former judges are, interrupted from the end of the table and said, no, he has been asked to keep time for us. And if he says your 15 minutes are up, well then, I'm sure he's right. And then someone asked if there was any reason why I would want to make any concluding statements, and then rapidly followed up. I think it was Ms. Durkin, and then rapidly followed up. But we're not soliciting comments. If you don't want to say anything to conclude, that's fine. You don't need to. I said, no. I really would like to, if you don't mind. And I should explain that I did bring up earlier the statement by Ms. Passanelli in the press conference that if there's any wrongdoing, this was in the context of the questioning about you're not taking on old cases, you're not taking on current cases. Is that an explicit acknowledgement that you're taking on new affairs that have not been investigated or not been investigated properly? And Passanelli said, yes, we do have a mechanism in effect that if information does come to us which we feel is particularly relevant and needs to be... I said, I know. I saw the press conference. You said that you would refer this information to the police department or, if necessary, to the district attorney's office to do something with it. And then, in fact, she followed up in the press conference with, ours is purely related to a look at policies and procedures. We're not looking at misconduct, which was a very blanket statement indicating we don't want to hear any crap. I mean, that's the way it came across in the press conference. So I did grill her for a time earlier in the session about, well, what does that mean? District attorney? When you say district attorney, you mean the U.S. attorney for the District of Western Washington? Is that what you mean by district attorney? Because you weren't real specific about the use of the term. You're going to refer this for federal investigation? If somebody comes up with something that needs to be investigated under the U.S. Code? And, Birdie, for short, did indicate that was the case. So in my concluding statements, I said, well, yeah, I've got a concluding statement for you. And here it is. Kurt Cobain was murdered. You want my concluding statement? There it is. You want some matters to refer to other investigative bodies? There's your information. Kurt Cobain was murdered. Now what are you going to do about it? You going to make a federal case out of it because I came here and talked to you? Is that right, Ms. Passanelli? And she said, well, blah, 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 you say that, and I don't know what you're getting at, and I said, what I'm getting at is Norm Stamper took over as police chief in, I think his first day on the job was basically early March of '94. Kurt Cobain was murdered a month later, and Stamper made a decision, undoubtedly, on the cell phone to So Don Cameron, who you're investigating anyway, or who's the motivating misdeeder, allegedly, that has created this panel, and he told Don Cameron, Mr. Homicide, whatever, you and Larry Farrar finish this thing up by noon. If your desire is to treat this as a suicide, then you treat the case that way. Make sure you get out of there by noon and we'll be done with it. It's not a murder investigation. Don't worry. I certainly won't insist that it is or that it should be. And this, of course, you folks are not overlooking the fact, I said, that we're talking about Don Cameron, and we're talking about manipulated or manufactured evidence. I've never manufactured evidence at a crime scene, and like I told the mayor, he hasn't either, but there are certain persons, like Norm Stamper, in that Painter interview, explicitly admits that it was his practice to manufacture evidence against people when he was in San Diego. So, you know, you've got, you know, the elements of what you need there for a homicide investigation. And then there were general comments of thank you for your time. Johnson came from the end of the table to the to my end of it, stuck his hand out as I was attempting to interact with Pazinelli, and said, well, thank you for your time, we do thank you for your participation. Stuck his hand out, and I was shaking it and saying, so Berdina, Ms. Pazinelli, I've given you the information that you need, right? Now you can get off to a federal investigation of this matter, right? You can, in fact, begin your investigation of the interstate conspiracy to commit the murder of Kurt Cobain. Is this what I am to expect? And, you know, there was a looking downward and a taking of notes, and Pazinelli just smiled. And I said, am I supposed to make note of that as a smirk or merely a smile? And she said, if you have information, then we are willing to look at anything that you would put in the mail. Do you have all of our addresses? Do you need our address? And I said, no, Ms. Pazinelli, I know where to find you. You're the FBI. You're in the federal building. I know where that is. So what I'm going to do, Ms. Pazinelli, is I'm going to provide you with even further information that you'll need to conduct your theoretical investigation by federal authorities of the murder of Kurt Cobain. Okay? And as I was leaving, I said, you know, Ms. Pazinelli, I've got a trivia question for you that's particularly germane to the issue we're discussing here. This information has been provided to the FBI in the past. They've been properly informed. I informed the FBI on a rather thorough basis in 1994. And do you know who the party is who responded and rejected the evidence that I offered? And she said, no, who? And I said, E. Michael Cahoe. E. Michael Cahoe, the major crimes, violent crimes and major offenders section chief. I didn't hold up the document, but I've got it right here. This is the cover letter, actually, by John H. Call, an assistant, essentially, for the FBI. And I said, so Ms. Pazinelli, you know who E. Michael Cahoe is, right? And she said, oh, yes, I do. And I said, oh, well, tell me, who is he? And she said, well, I'm not going to go into a whole... And I said, but just let me know. How did he end his career? You just tell me. How did Michael Cahoe end his career? And she said, well, he went to jail. He went to prison. And I said, oh, did he? I knew he was prosecuted for offenses while in office, but did he actually serve time? Oh, yes, he did. He went to prison. He sure did. And I said, well, that's good. That's fine. Now you know all you need to know about why the Bureau rejected this case in '94. It was rejected by a guy who was one of the few ever FBI executives, and he was one of the topmost executives in D.C. In fact, for manipulating evidence, for destroying evidence in the Randy Weaver case. So now that you know that, Ms. Passanelli, you know really everything that you need to know, don't you? And then, at that point, I was ushered out. So, of course, the idea here is that regardless of her extreme disinterest in what I was describing, of course, or let's just say what I perceive to be her extreme disinterest in what I was describing, Passanelli, in fact, what she said as I was leaving was, well, I'll look in our files. I'll look in our files and I'll see what we've got on that. If what you're saying is true, then I'm sure we've got something in our files on that. Which I let go. I really did. I mean, I just let it pass, although obviously anyone who is as much of a devotee of the history of the Fibbies as I am would know. The fact is that FBI people talking about our files and how we have everything in them is not a particularly tasteful thing to do. Especially under these circumstances. But, they got nothing on me, If they probably have a lot on me, but none of it is involving criminal activity. None of it, presumably, unless they've manufactured something. So, that's where we left it. Bernetta's going to look at the damn files. She's going to pull the files from, J. Edgar's office or down there in the basement with Mully and Scalder, and she's going to see, the case was rejected by E. Michael Cahoe. He was the guy who initially said, no dice, we're not going to follow up on this. Goodbye, good luck, leave us alone. Don't call, don't write. Don't send no telegrams. It's over. Presumably, I don't think it was really his signature at the bottom of the page. It was probably, I have actually two extremely differing versions of Mr. Cahoe's signature. So he's obviously an individual that let people sign for him, so as to whether he ever closely examined the evidence in the Kurt Cobain case, let's guess he didn't. Let's guess he probably didn't get past page 2. Right? But of course, obviously, a new day is dawning, right? Now we've got SAC Berdina on the case, Yeah. I'm sure Berdina's going to take care of the situation. Yeah. I'll probably be in there, the federal building for hours and hours next week, spilling my guts, like in some dopey-ass TV movie, letting them know all about this major crime this violent crime by major offenders, presumably the suspects being the Courtney Hull gang. Although, of course, to finally conclude this little bit of reportage, let me point out the obvious in terms of why I have complete confidence, almost totally complete confidence, that absolutely nothing will be done. These people work for Bill Clinton, okay? Who does Bill Clinton work for? Well, he's, technically speaking, an employee of the Treasury Department, but they only pay him 200 G's a year, and he can't even keep up with his legal bills at 200 G's a year. So, who's Bill Clinton really working for? Well, Bill Clinton's really working for the people that he has high hopes of being employed by in really what's virtually no time at all now. And that is the David Geffen corporations, MCA and, DreamWorks. And I'm just repeating what's been the hot rumor, in the major media for years, as we've reported. It's been on Saturday Night Live as an item of speculation and humor. It is obviously the going rumor that's been around for a very long time about what Clinton's going to do. Although actually a few months ago, he was photoed with Spielberg in a golf cart, and this is in Time magazine, and Spielberg says, no, Clinton has no agreement to work for him at DreamWorks when he's no longer president. Who's going to believe what Spielberg says? I never really believed he wanted to work for DreamWorks anyway. That's just a euphemism for saying that he's going to want to be the chairman of Seagram's MCA, or at least of MCA Studios, Universal, So these people work for Clinton, and, David Geffen isn't dropping all that money on Bill Clinton publicly and who knows, perhaps privately for nothing. You know, he's getting service for his fees from Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton, I mean, for those of you who don't know, David Geffen owns the copyright on Nirvana music. David Geffen is going to be the guy that makes all the money off of Kurt Cobain in perpetuity, or at least for the next 75 years, as I understand it. And let's just point out one other thing, which is that David Geffen has had no other successes in the music biz in the last decade. All of his efforts in that area have been abysmal failures. And the accomplishments of DreamWorks, in which Geffen is merely a partner, and in some ways perhaps a minor partner, has also been pretty much a dud. In other words, David Geffen not only is making all the money off of Kurt Cobain, but it's the only money he's making. It's the only money he's made in this whole decade-long phase of his career since he became a billionaire through MCA. Specifically through the sale of MCA to the Japanese corporation Matsushita, which then a few years later sold it to Seagram. Also a foreign corporation, obviously. So, you know, Berdina works for Clinton, and Mike McKay worked for Clinton for, you know, at least one of his 5 years or so, 4 years or so as U.S. Attorney. These other two guys, the retired judge and the UW prof, they got no clue about that, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, what they're here to do is not to sort through the Kurt Cobain murder or anything else. What they're here to do is to decide whether enough caca has stuck to you-know-who that they should terminate his stay in our fair city, or whether Paul Schell is going to, in some way, make an extremely foolish decision to stay on board an airship which is obviously crashing and burning. As a final note, our advice would be use that parachute, you know, because it's not going to be around forever. Norm Stamper's crashing and burning, and anyone who wants to stay on board that airship is no politician in my book, I'll tell you that. Shell's virtually only claim to having a career is that in his various roles he's this political animal. Well, if he's not enough of a political animal to bail under these circumstances, we must have been deceived, you know? We know he's not a practicing attorney. We know he's not really an architect. We know he's not really a lot of things, but we at least assumed he was a politician, but that does remain to be seen. And of course, it will be seen right here, allowing that this program remains on the air. And I'm Richard Lee, and thanks for joining us. And with any luck, we'll be back again. Yep, the man is hard at work, and so am I.
You can forget Star Wars because the big lines in Hollywood are for Ricky Martin. His fans have been camping out since yesterday for Ricky's appearance tonight with Jay Leno. And last night, Ricky joined Tom Hanks and John Travolta lining up for us at the big Blockbuster Bash. Our ET team coverage begins with Mark Steinis.
Only ET can take you backstage with the stars
at the Blockbuster Entertainment Awards. And look, another one, bro.
Trophy in hand at last night's Blockbuster Entertainment Awards. But as our Chris Reggie discovered, the Latin superstar was more than a winner. He was the main attraction. Star was more than a winner. He was the main attraction. Than a winner. He was the main attraction. The main attraction. Star was more than a winner. He was the main attraction. Discovered the Latin superstar was more than a winner. He was the main attraction. We actually had one person say, he's like Elvis.
It's true. Another one, but
A dress disaster. I'm really sorry.
What's the matter? Falling down?
A little bit.
How are you?
Goddess, also known as Drew. The goddess, also known as the goddess, also known as the goddess, also known as Drew. The goddess, also known as Drew Barrymore. Yay!
When they announced your name, you couldn't contain yourself.
No, I give these things. I don't get them.